Alright, once again, I don't think I've recorded this in video format, but quick rundown of the game that most stands out to me and the ideas I've had for different video games, besides Terraria 2 being like Breath of the Wild, like taking a lot of inspiration from that and making it 3D, and FromSoft making the next 3D Castlevania and basically combining Bloodborne, Sekiro, and maybe Elden Ring, but really just those two will do it, into probably the best and I'd say definitely the only proper 3D Castlevania game. Anyways, that's all aside. The game I had an idea for was basically 3 tiers of gameplay happening simultaneously, although maybe on different time scales, at least for the 3rd tier. So you have first-person shooter gameplay, you have RTS gameplay, commanding the each battle, I guess, each team for your team. And then you'd have a 3rd tier that's kind of like Risk, and you determine each of these scenarios. And this is a new idea I just had, but like just now. But you could make it. I've been listening to Hardcore History about different wars, and you could make it very much live up to the name of the game Risk, where you can only allocate so many resources and you have all these different war fronts going on, and suddenly, and this could go wrong. Maybe you want to not include this because it could lead to a scenario where you play a first-person shooter match or an RTS match that is just not very fun because you've been given a shit hand by the person playing the Risk thing on a different time scale, just looking at the whole map and thinking, okay, but that could also lead to some incredible moments where you're outgunned, you're maybe outnumbered, and by the merits of the first-person shooter players and the RTS commander, who can't directly control the units, obviously, but can give objectives and structure the whole thing, you could pull some shit out of a hat that would just, it's like Thermopylae, but they don't die. It's like some kind of incredible last stand that against all odds works out or doesn't, and you fight down to the last man, and then there's one guy left, and it's a big dramatic defeat. But I think that could be really cool. The idea I just had is that VR is obviously perfect for the first-person shooter layer, and I don't think it's required, although it should probably be the main focus, so that anybody who decides to play that layer of things on a controller or a mouse and keyboard has to know what they're getting into. Like, you're going to be playing against people who are playing in VR, which, unless you are an incredible player on different input mouse and keyboard controller especially, you're going to be having a pretty hard time matching the situational awareness and just general snappiness of their controls. But it should be an option. But I think that that layer should be designed for VR. And that's difficult because, logistically, because VR is the platform that's going to have the least number of players, especially if you want this to be large-scale warfare. You're going to need maybe exclusively PC VR players, because I'm not sure our current standalone headsets could handle that sort of thing, no matter how they downgrade the graphics. But if you could make that happen, I'm imagining something almost like PlanetSide 2. Let's say even you have 1,000 people on a server, and it's a big map with various zones. It replicates more than most games the actual structure of warfare in different environments. And I don't think you need to make it a milsim, but that part of it could be very realistic, and you have necessary coordination resulting from that. You can't just run and gun Call of Duty the whole thing, jumping around, playing it like an arena shooter. You have to oh shit, okay, we're in a war. And that's where the commander role would really come in. If you can pull that off, having, I don't know, imagine even having 100 people playing in VR, trying to capture an objective, nearby there's another 100 who have set up a base and are holding that down. vehicles and all that would obviously be great. Destruction, if you could make that happen, would be really, really cool. Especially in VR. I mean, it's already great in on flat screen because you could be a sniper or somebody, using in a position that you feel safe in, and all of a sudden that it's being blown the fuck up. There's no wall in front of you anymore. You need to find new cover. But I think just that synergy, especially in VR where you have people really feeling like they're in the war, and then you have the commander looking down on those people. Again, can't control them directly. Maybe some robotics that you can directly control to build things or do medical stuff, but they would have to coordinate that entire battle against a team with the enemy commander. And then the result of that battle would in part be, it would definitely show up on like a risk board, different colors on the planet, different countries, different zones, whatever. And that person would just be maybe just checking their phone throughout the day, and looking at this risk board and shifting their agenda that then kind of trickles down to every team. I don't know, that could be a really cool thing if pulled off, and I'd like to see it pulled off more as a platform than a specific game. So not a modern military shooter necessarily, not a sci-fi shooter. Maybe mod support would be necessary for this, but you'd have to have some kind of melee physics and collision, because that's the thing I'd really like to see, is some kind of medieval warfare along those lines. It could be amazing. I'm really just waiting for a VR game to have multiplayer physics-based melee combat that feels right. But because there's single-player games that feel pretty right, like if it felt like that in multiplayer, it'd be great. But so far, nobody's pulled that off in multiplayer. And the first person to do so has the potential not only to make something like this happen, but really to make the first VR MMO that stands out as an experience you simply cannot have on flat screen, not by any approximation, where, I imagine something like, it would almost be less level-based and more literal skill-based. I imagine something somewhere in between World of Warcraft faction PvP and Dark Souls invasions. I say World of Warcraft for the concept of you're running through the woods and oh shit, you suddenly see somebody that's a higher level than you who just PvP's on. They can kill you. And in the invasion thing, because I've had some moments in Dark Souls where I'm not even that great at Dark Souls, and especially in terms of getting the best equipment and everything. In this particular memory, this guy shows up, he has just ludicrous shit. And I'm a pretty basic ass dude and some early game armor and some early game weapons, not that upgraded or upgraded really at all. And I beat him. And that's some of the most fun I've ever had with video game multiplayer, was being completely outmatched by every statistical level and still coming out on top by just pure skill. And to have that in that forest encounter where you're level 3 and you're running through a forest with your iron sword and this guy shows up just, way, way above your pay grade, maybe even with some statistical advantages, but the main crux of combat being combat, your reactions, your parries, your thrusts, your decisions, moment to moment to engage or hold back, rather than it just being a numbers game. That could be the most, that MMO would sell like fucking hotcakes. Just that experience, I promise you. Even single player RPGs, I'm waiting for something like an Elder Scrolls combined with Blade and Sorcery kind of game. It's money. There's money on the table. I just don't know anything about game development, so I can't